This week, we are starting our first module covering the human body systems. So obviously this is a human biology class, so a big chunk of the information that we're going to cover are the systems of the human body. We started kind of with an introduction to our body systems with the integumentary system last week. And this week we are starting off with the all-important cardiovascular system. And that is covered in chapters 5 and 6 of our textbook. Chapter 5 is going to be focusing on the anatomical parts of the heart and the system of blood vessels that travels through our body. And chapter 6 will focus on blood. So in chapter 5, we're going to do sections 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So skipping over section 5.4. So for all of these human body systems that we cover, the chapters are significantly longer than we have time to cover in this class, and that would be true for a 16-week semester as well. So the assigned readings for each chapter are going to be listed here on the slides and also on the reading assignments posted in Canvas. Our takeaways for chapter 5. What are the functions of the cardiovascular system and what parts of the body make up that system? We want to look at the individual functions of arteries, arterioles, veins, venules, and capillaries. And then we want to be able to define or identify what types of tissues are found in the cardiovascular system. A lot of those questions, what are the function, what are the tissue types, and what parts of the body, those are the main questions that we are going to be looking at through all of the human body system. So which parts make up that body system and what do they do? And then specifically for the cardiovascular system, I would like for you to be able to describe the path, the pathway that blood takes through the body. So if you were given a location within the body, where would that go next? And where did that blood come from? So let's start out with the functions of the cardiovascular system. When we know that it's a transportation network. We're carrying blood through the cardiovascular system through that series of blood vessels being pumped by the heart. And those are a continuous series of blood vessels. So they are all going to be connected. Blood leaving the heart will then be returned to the heart through that same system. And that's the purpose of pumping blood through the heart, is to deliver oxygen and nutrients to cells. That's all carried in the bloodstream. We're going to see things like hormones carried in the bloodstream. We're going to see things like the nutrients that we're absorbing through the digestive system are eventually going to be moved through the bloodstream. And then also to carry waste away from the cells. So the byproducts of that cellular respiration and metabolism, carbon dioxide, things that would be toxic to our cells, ammonia-based products, nitrogen-based products. We'll see the many ways that our body has to get rid of those. Secondary to transportation, we are also, the cardiovascular system is performing a protective function, because this is where we're going to see the cells of our immune system housed and transported throughout the body. So we'll talk about white blood cells as part of the cardiovascular system and also as part of the lymphatic system next, our body's other system of vessels. And then lastly, we've got the regulation of our internal homeostases. So one of the things that makes us qualify as being a living thing, right? And that's a lot of those functions are going to be performed by the cardiovascular system, maintaining our body temperature, our internal temperature, working to maintain our blood pH at roughly 7.4. That's like the sweet spot for the pH of blood. At that pH level, many of our body's chemical processes work the best. And then also working to maintain levels of water and electrolytes. We don't want our blood to be too thick, have not enough water. It's going to make it more difficult for the heart to pump it through the body. but we also don't want it to be too thin, having too much water. So that delicate balance of solute concentration to water to cells. And all of that are going to kind of be sensed by cells within our cardiovascular system so that we can regulate that. So let's look at those blood vessels. There are about 60,000 miles. 60,000 miles of blood vessels. That's more miles than I have driven with my current car. 60,000 miles of blood vessels in the average human body. That's amazing. But they're obviously not one single long tube. They're highly branched so that blood and oxygen and nutrients that are carried within those vessels can reach its destination as quickly as possible. So that idea of form follows function, we're going to see that here. The size of the blood vessel and how it's getting into the individual tissues is serving the function that it is intended to do. I'm going to back up a little bit. These images here are from the Body Worlds exhibit. If you've never seen that, it's really awesome. So all of the blood vessels have undergone a process called plasticization, where they've injected plastic into the blood vessels so that you can really see all of that highly branched series of vessels that get into all of our muscles and our bones, so that we can be carrying all of the things that our bodies need to maintain itself. Really cool. There are 4 main types of blood vessels. Our arteries are the largest vessels that carry blood away from the heart. And as they get further away from the heart, those arteries are going to branch out into slightly smaller vessels called arterioles. And then arterioles lead into even smaller vessels called capillaries. And these capillaries are the smallest kind of vessel that we have, and these are the ones that are responsible for allowing the exchange of materials between the blood and the cells of the body, the tissues of the body. So the job, you could say, of arteries and arterioles is to carry oxygenated blood, rich in oxygen, away from the heart. And then once it's made its way into a capillary, that oxygen can then be deposited at the tissues of the body to be used for cellular respiration, for making energy. And then the capillaries will also absorb the waste product, carbon dioxide, and carry that back to the heart through the venules and through the veins. So arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart, and veins carry deoxygenated blood back to the heart, with the goal of being reoxygenated in the lungs. We'll talk about the 2 pathways or circuits that blood takes through our body. Let's look at these really cool capillaries again. Most capillaries are going to be arranged in what we call a capillary bed. So here's the blood coming from the heart, rich in oxygen, ready to go out to the tissues of the cell. It's going to be traveling through the artery into the arterioles, and it's going to find its way into a capillary bed. And that capillary bed might be embedded in a muscle tissue or an organ tissue, and that's what's going to provide the nutrients and provide the oxygen that those tissues need to be able to function. And then once they are all used up and they have everything they need, the deoxygenated blood will travel out of the capillary bed back into a venule, out into a vein, and back to the heart. The size of these guys makes a huge difference. The small, teeny tiny capillaries are only large enough in diameter for a single red blood cell or a single white blood cell to get through. That makes the amount of surface area that cell has. Remember, we have oxygen lining those red blood cells. And the more that oxygen can come into contact with the capillary and come into contact with the tissue on the surrounding side, the more chance it has to move that oxygen through simple diffusion, through the plasma membranes of that cell, of those cell walls. So going through single file, teeny tiny vessels to carry those through single file makes them function more efficiently. Arteries and veins, on the other hand, are larger. because their function is to carry it more quickly. The goal there is not the exchange of nutrients or the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's to get something from the heart quickly to the tissue, or to get it from the tissue back to the heart quickly. So being larger in size, the arteries and the veins, better for transportation. Capillaries, smaller in size, better for the exchange of nutrients. So really good example there of form follows function. Let's look at the layers of tissue that we're going to see inside of blood vessels. Because the function of capillaries is the exchange of materials, we are going to see a single layer of epithelial tissue. Single layer, so that's a simple layer. Remember, stratified would be multiple layers of epithelial tissue. In this case, it's going to be simple. So those teeny tiny capillaries are only a single cell thick, and they're very thin, squamous, squished, right? So here's one side of the plasma membrane, and here's the other side. Very small distance for that oxygen to have to travel. Blood is traveling in the middle, carrying red blood cells, depositing its oxygen, going through simple diffusion to get out into the tissue surrounding it. So simple epithelial cells. Arteries and veins, on the other hand, have 3 layers of tissue, and that's because their function is a little bit more complicated. So they're going to have on the outside, going from the outside, a layer of connective tissue. In the middle, they're going to have a layer of smooth muscle tissue. Smooth muscle, anytime you see smooth muscle within the body, what you want to think is this is an automatic function. Smooth muscle is operated by our automatic nervous system. We do not have to manually tell our brains to constrict or contract smooth muscle. So that's something that's going to be influenced by the pH of the blood. Do we need to let more blood through or less blood through? So things like our blood pressure can be impacted by the reaction of that smooth muscle. And then finally, on the inside, we have a layer of epithelial tissue. And the purpose of that, because remember, epithelial tissue lines all of our internal body cavities, in this case, the inside of our blood vessels, and that's to keep the inside kind of lubricated and moving so that the blood is not getting hung up on anything. So if you could describe the layers of the tissues found in blood vessels and their function and how they work together to perform a function, then you have all of the information that you would need there. I'm going to pick up our discussion of the cardiovascular system in video 2.